Hello, I'm Pastor Paul. Welcome to the Lord of Life Lutheran Church Sermon Podcast. We're glad you're here. We know that you can't always be in worship with us, so we're glad to provide the sermons from our weekly services. We hope that you will find hope and inspiration as we have in Jesus Christ. And now, here's this week's message.
Holy Gospel according to John, the 11th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, See how he loved him. But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was laying against it. Jesus said, Take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, Unbind him and let him go. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Many of our Jewish brothers and sisters have been or will be doing something powerful in the wake of last weekend's violence that took the lives of worshipers at the Tree of Life Synagogue. In the Jewish tradition, friends, family, and synagogue members gather around those who are left behind following the death of a loved one. They gather sometimes without saying a word to share the space of a living room or kitchen, and they pray and they weep and they recall the life of the one who is gone. It's called sitting Shiva. Have you ever heard it? A practice that comes from the book of Job, it is believed, a time when friends gathered around the one who was grieving and sat on low stools and were present. This is likely what's going on in today's reading with Mary and Martha, who are grieving the loss of their brother Lazarus. People are gathered around and there's a lot of weeping and crying. And we do this too. We don't call it sitting Shiva, but we do kind of naturally gather around those who are experiencing grief, don't we? We bring food, or we run errands for them so that they don't have to do them, or we help with yard work, or we do whatever needs to be done so that those who are grieving need not focus their energy on those tasks. And eventually, after some period of time, after some time goes by, those who are mourning learn how to move forward with their life. Life may look different now, but just the same, life continues. Perhaps you identify with one of the characters in our reading today. Perhaps you've been there with Mary and Martha, or you've been one of the people gathered around who brought something to share, or is just sitting with those who are deeply grieved at the death of a loved one. Perhaps you've been the one questioning God's failure to show up in time, like Mary. Or perhaps you identify with Martha's strong faith and confession about Jesus and ready to move forward quickly. Maybe you're feeling a bit of kinship with Lazarus, with all those things that have bound him, put on him by the community. Death has a smell. We don't often actually smell death, do we? But most of us can relate to the smell of that dead mouse in the back corner of the garage or the basement or the ceiling. We know the smell of those leftovers that were in the fridge for too long, or maybe even left in a takeout container in the back of the car on a sunny day. Life is full of death moments. The end of relationships, the end of a job or a marriage, the very real death of a loved one, or even the death of an idea or innocence. Death has a smell, and it stinks. Jesus calls Lazarus and says, "Come out," even as the mourners warn about the stench of death already inside the tomb. Jesus calls to Lazarus and says, "Come out and experience resurrection. Learn what it means to live again in me." And Lazarus comes out of the tomb, stench and all, bandages and all, alive and all. Jesus proclaims resurrection and turns death upside down. Later in John's Gospel, we'll hear about Lazarus and Jesus reclining together, hanging out together. I imagine they're eating some popcorn and watching the game, or, well, maybe not, but they're hanging out together. Lazarus and Jesus time. Good friends. That's the kind of resurrection we hope for, right? New life with Jesus. Notice too, though, that Jesus resurrects Lazarus in the text right here and right now, and invites Lazarus into community right here and right now, into new life in that place, into resurrection life, and resurrection is proclaimed. Lazarus, come out. When we're in the midst of death, it's hard for us to see new life ahead. When we experience the end of things in our lives, like the things I mentioned earlier, relationships, jobs, maybe even school, life as we knew it before a loved one dies, it's helpful for us to think about the resurrection. Do you have stories like these in your life? Do you have places in your life where you've experienced suffering, illness, or disease? Have you received forgiveness when you were sure you didn't deserve it? Have you been part of healing, justice, or renewal? Have you had to find your way forward following the death of a loved one? I said before, death has a smell and it stinks. Each time we experience the stink, the stench of death, there's an opportunity for God to bring healing. For us to be God's hands and feet, and to proclaim the resurrection power of Jesus for the world. We are witnesses to new life in Jesus. And it's more than just an idea. It's a way of living and seeing and smelling the world around us, which is radically different. It's daring, it's bold, it's gospel-centered, and life-giving for us and for others. Jesus, the one who weeps at the death of his friend and because of the sadness that's overtaken his friend's family. Jesus, who puts into motion the events that will see to his own death as he resurrects Lazarus. Jesus, who says, "I am the resurrection and the life." This Jesus is capable of giving you resurrection life too. This Jesus is able to walk with you when you think that you cannot take another step on your own. This Jesus is able to love you when you feel unlovable. This Jesus is able to take on your fear, your sadness, your pain. And this Jesus is able to weep with you when you're sad. The Lazarus story is the last of the signs shared in John's Gospel. There's so much more that follows. There is resurrection life that follows. On this All Saints Sunday, may we especially hold close to that promise of resurrection, especially as we read the names of those who have died. May we trust in that promise of resurrection for our own lives and proclaim it with joy to others. Amen.
Thanks for listening to the Lord of Life Lutheran Church Sermon Podcast. If you're ever in the Dubuque-Land area, please join us for worship. Visit our website at www.lordoflife.online to learn more about service times and about our vision for serving God and our community. God bless you.